Howdy everyone, Zakalachi here, and in this Armello overview, I'll be giving my thoughts on the various cards in the item deck. I categorize items into two different varieties, gear and consumables. Gear is stuff that's equipped onto your character's kit for permanent effects, mostly in battle, but also in perils and elsewhere, whereas consumables are one-time use items for a one-time use effect. Items use primarily gold as the currency to get them played, but some cards do give you rot instead. Cards in Armello come in 4 different rarities. Common means that there's 4 of these cards in the deck, uncommon is 3, rare is 2, and unique means that there's only 1 of them in the deck typically, although it is possible to get duplicates of some items from their respective merchant from the trickery deck. But that's pretty rare and nothing to plan around happening on a game-to-game basis. One of the best manipulators of items is Barnaby with his ability Tinkerer, allowing him to retain items into his hand when equipping over them, and reducing the cost to re-equip down to 0, so I'll be mentioning him a bit here and there for some things to consider. There are a total of 41 different cards considered items, so I'll try to be brief. But jumping right into it, we'll just go one screen at a time here. The Shining Steel Sword starts us off. It is a common, costing 2 gold and gives you +1 sword. It's fairly standard. Personally, I think it is slightly overpriced due to attacks being more common to roll in combat than shields, but you can't really see it being reduced down to 1 gold because then Battle Axe would become overpriced, but it's hard to give it anything else when it's such a standard baseline mainstay item. Good to have until you get something better on your kit though. Second is the Trusty Shield, which is also common and costs 2 gold, but it gives +1 shield instead of a sword. This is the counterpart to the Shining Steel Sword though, but it feels better priced at 2 gold for that shield instead of the sword due to shields being rarer to roll in combat than attacks. There's only 1 chance to roll a shield versus 3 chances on a standard roll to roll a hit. So you're never sad to see a Trusty Shield in my first few hands of the game, but like I said, it's usually equipped over in the later stages. The Adventurer's Kit is also common, costs 1 gold, and gives you an additional dice in all perils, including the King's Palace. This is an okay early game item, or if you have nothing else for an equip slot. You can also consider this a piece of bonus equipment that Barnaby likes to keep in his hand for that versatility potential of his ability. Fourth is the Warhammer, which are rare items. They cost 3 gold, giving +2 swords and -1 explode pool in battle. This is one of the best items in the game in my opinion. The 2 free locked-in swords is fairly efficient compared to the Shining Steel Sword, and you generally don't miss the explode pool since more often than not in combat you don't roll all your explodes, so it's basically 2 free swords with no downside for 3 gold. Next is Battle Axes, which are common, 1 gold giving +1 die in battle, good in the early game, holds you over until better gear comes along. Ranger's Cloaks are rare items costing 1 gold, and they grant evade and stealth whenever you're in a forest, day and night. Again, you can consider this great bonus gear for Barnaby to keep in his hand, but everyone else can also use this at some point, with forests being fairly plentiful around every map. Generally, this gets overwritten by other gear with actual stats at some point, but I mentioned in a couple of the clan overview videos that you can equip rings that also grant stealth in certain situations, along with this item, to potentially play a majority of the game in stealth, so that can be very fun to try to pull off sometime. The Warhorn is the first unique item on the list, costing 2 gold, and it gives an additional die per follower. It's a fairly situational item though. Basically, it can be a super strong battle axe or a cheap bane blade when you get up to 3 followers, but that's fairly rare and usually you only get 1 dice out of this, maybe 2, for equal value minus the secondary slot that this would get you at that time, but more often than not, I just burn this so it doesn't clog up my hand, because it's typically not worth the 2 gold to equip. It can help mitigate whenever you have the Stranger somewhat though, giving you that die from him, but otherwise there's typically better items to it. The Lord's Scepter is also a unique item, costing 3 gold, and it gives you +1 prestige for each claimed settlement you have, and then a flat +1 gold at dawn. It is slightly ambiguously worded on that 1 gold, it's not per settlement, it's only just +1, so that means it takes a minimum of 4 dawns before you start generating profit from this item, so it's better to equip this early to get as much value as you can if you plan on keeping it on your kit for a bit. The prestige gained comes and goes. It can encourage your opponents to target your settlements to chip away at your lead or keep you down and not let you get any value from this. But again, with Barnaby, you can keep this in your hand the majority of the time, and then at night equip it for its effect whenever dawn rolls around, giving you the free gold and the prestige for potentially sniping the lead each morning, and then you can have other things on your kit for the rest. Next is the Heavy Flail, which is a rare item costing 3 gold, and when you are attacking with this equipped, it gives you +2 swords and +1 explode pool. And this item is very polarizing, I've found, since it does nothing for you on defense. It's a purely offensive item, and I personally think it's slightly too expensive as it currently is, but it's hard to say how it could reasonably be fixed just due to the granular nature of Armello's design. Knocking it down to 2 gold would make it one of the best items in the game if you didn't change anything else, but you also can't take away the sword without it not being great again in that situation. Maybe you can make the +1 explode pool an always on effect while keeping the swords on offense only, because it's great when you're playing an offensive character like Fang who needs the help in combat, or someone like Gore who can take care of his defenses naturally, so it's great in those situations. But let me know what y'all think in the comments. How would you change the Heavy Flail to make it slightly more valuable, or do you think it's okay as it is? The Hare's Halberds are rare items as well, costing 2 gold, but they give you +1 die and then take away 1 die from your opponent in combat. This is my and Thanos' favorite item, perfectly balanced. This is a good equip on all stages of the game. It gives you either a big combat advantage or helps level the playing field if you're behind someone with more fight dice naturally than you. It also nullifies itself, so it can help you fight the King's Guards when normally they would get that 2 dice advantage over you from their Hare's Halberds that they have equipped. And the math works out so that a standard die roll in combat hits on 2 out of the 3 rolls, with the 3 hits for actual hitting and then 1 for the shields and then 2 misses. So with this, it gives you +1 of those 2/3 and then -2/3 for your opponent, with a net gain of 4/3 of a total hit on this statistically, which means it's better than a Shining Steel sword for the same price. Sailor's Lantern is also a rare item costing 1 gold, and it grants permanent scout around your character's location. Scout can be a very strong effect, letting you know if perils are worth risking it or if you definitely need to avoid them, and it also nullifies stealth and evade effects when you're fighting other people next to you. There are very few sources of permanent scout, this being one of them, and I find this piece of gear staying on my kit a lot longer than other pieces of bonus gear type items for just the consistent useful value it brings to the table. And I'm usually sad to see it go when equipping something else that actually gives you stats, but overall Sailor's Lantern is very solid. And the final item on this page are the Oak Spears, which are also rare, cost 2 gold, and give +1 sword all the time and an additional +1 sword when you're defending. This is another one of those cards that makes the Shining Steel sword feel overpriced since it costs the same, with the added effect of the extra sword when defending. Solid and efficient item overall, but that's offset by there only being 2 of these in the deck compared to the 4 swords. Moving right along, Longbows are an uncommon item costing 2 gold, and their effect is the first burn sun and moon in battle gains pierce. What this doesn't specifically say but actually happens is if you burn a moon during the day or a sun at night, that'll make that one still hit with the piercing. This makes this card great for cycling cards out of your hand more efficiently in combat when normally you wouldn't be able to. Piercing can be very strong since people usually really rely on shields throughout a game to stay alive, and also to ensure kills against the king on that final day potentially. Pretty solid if you have enough wits to reliably draw cards to get consistent use out of this, otherwise it's better to burn for the moon. Spyglass is a rare item granting you scout around every peril that you place around the board. It's more situational than Sailor's Lantern and usually a burn for me whenever I draw these. It can be good if you play a character that plays a lot of perils like Griot, but usually the slot becomes needed for better gear as the game goes on. Everything I said back at Sailor's Lantern regarding permanent scout still applies, but this isn't as great since the scout doesn't move, it's stuck to the perils, so generally you don't get as much new information as often with this one. Battle armor are uncommon pieces of gear costing 3 gold, and they give you +2 shields for the cost of 1 die. And this is one of the best pieces of gear you can find just period in a game. The math works out so that each die is equal to 1/6 chance of a shield, so trading in 1 die for 2 free shields is basically a 12 times value from just the probability side of things. It doesn't care about offense or defense like other items, it's just always on, but this item is better on characters that can spare the 1 die over others that don't have a lot of dice and fight naturally. Still very strong and generally a must-equip item in most games. Heavy Plate Armor is a rare card costing 4 gold, and it gives you +3 shields for the cost of 1 action point each turn. And there is exactly one situation in which Heavy Plate Armor is good, and that is when you are very close to or you're in the palace and you're expecting to do a lot of combat and you're confident no one else has a banish in their hand to punish you. If you find yourself in that situation with Heavy Plate Mail Armor in hand and the gold to equip it, this is literally the best card in the game, so you should always do that. But if you do it in any other situation, you will get laughed at and you will not be able to get anywhere since the -1 AP is just so punishing otherwise. Marauder's Gauntlets are a unique item giving you 1 rot whenever you equip them, and in exchange they give you +1 sword and shield in combat. And the math on this is 1 die is equal to 2/3 of any hit, as mentioned earlier, so when you're behind in a rot count, you're giving your opponent an additional 2/3 of a hit for guaranteed 2 hits on your side. And it's made even better because that's both a sword and a shield for nice even distribution. With everyone but the dragons becoming rotten starts losing you health each dawn, but that can be mitigated with healing effects and stone circles and other sources. These gloves are usually worth equipping all the time unless you can't spare the rot or are in a close rot game for some reason and you're behind, but that's very rare. But here is a screenshot of me having 2 of these unique items equipped because I got an extra from Simeon's Arms like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, so it can happen. And then there's the Bastard Sword, which are rare items costing 4 gold, and they give a +1 sword and +1 die for free in each combat. The eternal discussion around Bastard Sword is it better than Warhammer? It costs 1 more gold, only gives a sword and a die instead of 2 swords, but it also does not have any downside. The cost breakdown on this is 1 sword is 2 gold per the Shining Steel Sword, the +1 die is 1 gold per the Battle Axe, then having both of those condensed into 1 slot with no downside is the final gold, making 4. Basically it depends. It's better on characters with low fight to give them additional dice to catch them up, but worse in that it's harder to play as often and can sit in your hand for multiple turns while you get the gold necessary to equip it. If you twist my arm, I'll say Warhammer is slightly better on average, but I'm never sad to get a Bastard Sword equipped either. Starting off the next page are torches, which are uncommon, cost 1 gold, and then they give you an additional +1 gold after exploring every dungeon. This is great on Barnaby, of course, for the free gold when it's needed to equip, otherwise just keep it in your hand, and Amber, who does a lot of exploring for her ability. But it can also be equipped by everyone when you have the equip slot to spare or just need to find a way to get some bonus gold. This starts profiting on the 2nd dungeon explored, and everyone needs gold all game long, so it's a pretty solid item and easy to get value. And fun fact, the design is a reference to one of my other favorite games of all time, Darkest Dungeon, just with the iron crown and the design of the torch itself. Next is leather armor, which are a common item costing 3 gold, and they give you +1 shield in battles and perils. This is the equivalent of the Resist Amulet in item form, or the Resist Amulet is the leather armor in amulet form, and is fairly solid overall. It can feel expensive at first, paying 3 gold for what equates to a Trusty Shield for the battles, but then getting only a couple triggers on this in perils, particularly some nasty ones like Lightning Strike or Wake the Trees, or one of the side palace perils, and it's definitely well worth the cost. The flavor text for this item though says, "Don't ask where we got the leather," and when you think about it in the context of a world filled with anthropomorphic animal people, it's like, yeah. But I like to imagine it's their medieval version of like donating your organs after you die, so it's not all bad. Next are the Chainmail Shirts, which are rare items costing 4 gold, and they give +1 shield, and the effect of your first rolled miss in combat becomes a block with reflect instead. One of the best items in the game, practically on par or better than the treasures, and is an instant auto-equip if I can get one. The shield is solid, but the turning the remiss into a reflected shield can be game-winning against the king, and is nearly guaranteed to trigger in every other combat. A Reflect, when triggered, is both a block and a hit at once, so it's basically turning what would otherwise be nothing for you into 2 hits. Seriously, just equip this always and you'll never be sad. Feathered Helm is a rare item costing 3 gold, and it gives +1 shield and 1 prestige. Again, it's a more expensive Trusty Shield, just with another bonus effect on top. But I find this one is most impactful when it's equipped before turn 3, which is the second dawn of the game, to get a quick prestige lead and get that first declaration under your control. Otherwise, it starts to become more dead weight as the game goes on, and it feels bad equipping over it since it cost you 3 gold in the first place. Usually I just burn these in favor of saving my money and waiting for something better. Like a Tower Shield, which are also rare items, cost 3 gold, give 1 shield, but Tower Shields also give an additional shield when you're defending. This is the defensive counterpart to the Oak Spear, but is well worth the additional 1 cost compared to that item. As mentioned, shields are rare to roll in combat, so getting as many free shields as possible is always a good thing, especially when defending, when you're more likely to be taken advantage of at lower health. Just very solid and usually worth the equip slot all game long. Poison Dagger is the next unique rot item, giving you 1 rot when equipped, and then all rolled swords in battle gain poison. Fairly situational to get any long-term value from this. Usually it's just equipped as a stepping stone on your way to corruption. The poison spreading comes only into play if you roll a sword after all their blocks and they still live, so not too common, and just poisoning people generally doesn't make you any friends. Take it or leave it, but I usually equip over this once I have something better available. Next page, and we got the Iron Pike, which are common items costing 2 gold. And the first rolled sword pierces when you're attacking, but gains Reflect when you're defending. And I've had a bit of an awkward history with Iron Pike personally. I used to hate it, thought it was useless and too expensive, but came to realize its enhancing effects can actually be fairly useful. It's better on characters with higher fight naturally that can roll more dice for better odds of rolling the sword to trigger this, but it can be awkward depending on when the game determines that sword was rolled in the hit order. So the piercing can be good on offense to help ensure kills, especially against the king at low health, but I find the Reflect to be a bit more helpful, turning a sword into what would normally just be a hit into a potential block and hit. Very tricky to evaluate this card's overall impact, but I still equip it these days until something more consistent comes along. Next up is the King's Guard's armor. It's a rare item costing 2 gold, and the first 2 rolled suns and moons that would miss instead become defenses, which is very nice to have for the price. It's comparable to the Royal Shield Treasure, just with a lesser overall effect, only triggering twice instead of every time. And turning misses into defenses is just solid all on its own. It becomes even better against the king since he won't get those dice to roll against you. Pretty darn solid, and something really good has to come along for me to equip over this. Third up on this page are the Mahogany Staff, which are rare items costing 4 gold, giving you +1 spirit and +1 explode pool. While being pretty expensive initially, this is one of the best items that Barnaby can find at any time. Like with the Lord Scepter, you can equip this at the end of a day's turn before dusk rolls around, so that when it does, you get the +1 magic. Then you can put it away for a more useful item to use during the rest of the turn. For everyone else, extra magic is usually pretty helpful throughout a game, but the item slot becomes more and more painful to leave effectively empty in all other situations. And the final equipable item is the Reliable Short Sword, which are common, cost nothing to equip, and give you +1 explode pool, and the first burn miss explodes. So the best things in life are free, and getting this early in a game will never hurt. The burn misses, in my experience, are more often than not rot cards you don't want to play, since it can be risky committing to rot early in a game when you don't know if it can become corrupted enough to fight the king or if it will peter out. So this allows you to just get those out of your hand for the 2/3 hit chance instead and draw more cards. Otherwise, it's just a sword burn for the rest of the game. And now moving on to the consumables, starting with Cub's Blood, which is a unique potion giving you 1 rot whenever you play it, and you can teleport the nearest Bane to a tile next to you. You have to play this adjacent to yourself, but the plays that you can do with it are pretty interesting. The rot gained can put you ahead of the Bane that you're summoning, or just get you closer to being corrupted, and more often than not you're summoning that Bane onto a settlement to terrorize it for the extra prestige if you win, or to block a mountain pass to make things more annoying for your opponents. Just interesting plays to consider when this card comes up. Second consumable is Poison Gift, which are rare cards, also giving you 1 rot, and they will poison the target that you play this on until the end of their next turn. And like with the other poison cards, this one won't win you any friends, especially if you play it on someone already at low health, and they've been struggling all game with multiple deaths, and they've had to fight all the way all across the board to get to their quest that's 4 turns away, and they're almost there, and then you hit them with this, and they just sigh. This card literally hurts people's souls, so play it as often as possible because limiting your opponents can be a huge advantage in Armello. And now the moment we've all been waiting for, with Hot Rot Wine, which are uncommon cards, give you 1 rot when you play them, and they give 1 action point and take away 1 HP from their target. So you technically can use this to kill people, and I've done that in the past, but their primary effect is the gaining 1 AP, which makes it one of the most defining cards in an entire game. For those unaware of the impact of this card, you basically hold on to it until you can breach the palace. Normally doing so would cost all your AP to move into the palace, and then you would have to end your turn before you get a chance to fight the king. But with this, you can drink it after breaching to regain 1 more AP and then fight the king without anyone getting a chance to interrupt you. Side effects include ulcers for the rest of the character's life and that 1 rot, but this can either put you over the top of the king's rot when you're corrupted, or just give the king 1 more die to fight you with. This can allow you to sneak in a quick snipe on the king as a spirit walker or river on the final day, but mostly this gives you a chance to fight the king uninterrupted. If you get one of these, hold on to it for as long as possible for that opportunity, and if you notice an opponent has an item card consistently at the top of their hand after a couple of turns, it could be that they're holding on to a hot rot and you might want to try to steal that, using the same logic. Overall, this is one of the most game-defining effects if used properly. And finally, getting out of all this rotten business is Mountain Moss, which is uncommon, costs 1 gold, and it makes your rot count 2 less until the end of your next turn. This is obviously best when you're behind on the rot count and need to fight someone higher than you, or when you have 1 or 2 rot and want to prevent the rot non-damage. Otherwise, just burn it for the exploding wild symbol when not corrupted. Wyldsap are thankfully common, costing 2 gold and regain you 4 HP when consumed. You're never sad to have a Wyldsap in hand, since for pretty much everyone that's still alive and hurt, it's a full heal, unless they're really stacked on body. When you're drawing items and praying for healing, this stuff is better than literal ambrosia. Next up is Moon Juice, also common, costs 1 gold and gives you +2 magic. This is a very helpful card that gives enough magic to fire off those high cost spells you normally wouldn't be able to, or just play a lot of spells to clear your hand out. Best course of action is to drink this as soon as dusk rolls around, so you have the extra slot in hand in order to get another card to play. Brazenberry Ale are uncommon, costing 1 gold, and they will give you +1 fight at the cost of 1 wits until the end of your next turn. Good little fight boost when you need to beat your way through a bunch of stuff, or as another hit on a crust reward for your fight quests. -1 wits basically makes it so this card does not cycle while its effect is in play, thus limiting your options, but is usually a manageable drawback for the value you gained instead with proper play. Throwing axes are uncommon, cost 2 gold to play, and will inflict 2 HP worth of damage on your target. You can play this to yourself if you want to commit suicide, to have a death warp to warp you back to your clan grounds, if your quest is near there and it'll otherwise take you a couple turns. That is an option. But otherwise, it's just solid, safe damage. You can be very well worth the cost to play this on someone to ensure a kill on a bounty or a bane, and thus paying for itself or more. You can play this to someone to kill them instead of fighting them if they're just in your way, looking at you funny, were mean to you earlier, your dog barks when it's their turn and you get bad vibes from their giving off, they stole your money, it's just Thursday, or they were a jerk. It doesn't matter why, just axe to the face. Getting near the end here with Wyld Weed, which are common cards costing 1 gold and restores 2 HP to you. This is the finest leaf in the South Farthing, the perfect picker-upper topper offer of any boo-boos you might have gotten adventuring around the kingdom. And I imagine it smells like a cross between lavender and maple syrup. Moving right along to Bubble Tea, which is a unique consumable costing 1 gold and it gives you 1 prestige. And I don't know if we're sharing this supposedly super fancy import quote-unquote bubble tea with anybody, but if you actually look at the image, it looks to me like there's some dead roly-poly / pill bugs in this thing, and like a stick. Just what are we drinking here? Are we paying money to drink this? Is this a dare from somebody? I have so many questions and so few answers on how drinking this boiled plant matter runoff water with questionable inclusions makes you more popular with the masses. There aren't even any bubbles in this thing. Next up is Snake Venom, which is a rare consumable costing 2 gold, and it's a temporary version of the Poison Dagger effect where until the end of your next turn, all rolled swords will gain poison. It's pretty situational like the Poison Dagger. This won't make you any friends, poisoning people, and I usually burn this as a rot symbol on perils or when breaching the palace instead of playing for its effect. And the final real item, but the penultimate card, is Blackberry Dust, which is uncommon, costs nothing to play, and gives you +1 magic and 1 HP, but costs you 2 explode pool until the end of your next turn. Like with Moon Juice, the most optimal time to play this is after dusk rolls around, but before your turn, so you can get the magic gained on top of your usual stuff with the extra card to draw. But don't be afraid to play this during the day if you need the HP in order to survive. Better to live and lose the magic than not. -2 explode pool is only really punishing on characters with small ones to begin with, but everyone else is happy to take the free HP pretty much any time. And the final card in the item deck is the Illusion card, which is unique, costs nothing, and this is basically the card Nazar gets from his hero power after drawing cards himself. Playing this allows him to send a clone to an adjacent tile to either activate perils without risk to himself or potentially confuse his opponents. You can hear more about that in the Dragon Clan overview video, but technically the card itself is an item, so it gets included at the end here. And so that is all of the item cards. Draw items early for good gear when you need some healing, or just all the time, or just when you're digging for those hot rot wines to close out a game. Like and subscribe if you want more of this type of content. Let me know what your favorite item is, and hopefully y'all have a great rest of your day. Until next time.